everyone. Welcome to the Dyl Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo. Welcome to your favorite podcast next door, your channel next door, your friendly neighborhood Dyl Pickle Movie Network. I don't know what I'm saying, but this is a review for a film about a room that is next door. It is The Room Next Door, directed by Pedro Almodovar. This is a part of our New York Film Festival 62 coverage. I've been apologizing in all my previous videos, but I'll do it here as well. Sorry for the hiatus. It's been a while. There's been a lot of stuff going on in the month of October and trickling into November that I needed to deal with on a personal level, and now I'm back and I'm here, and I will admit there's a little anxiety with this one because obviously when you get to cover a festival, there are going to be a bunch of films that really speak to you, or even if they're not necessarily your favorites of the fest, you have a lot of interesting things to say about them. And then you have the films that are just outright stinkers that you're like, yeah, that sucked. But then you have films like this where I have so much respect for Pedro Almodovar, for Tilda Swinton, for Julianne Moore, for Alessandro Nivola, for everyone involved, both on camera, behind the camera. I have so much respect for the people who put together the festival. I mean, this was a big event. You know, this was the centerpiece of the festival, and they had Pedro Almodovar basically announced as their chaplain recipient for later on in the year for their gala. I mean, this is a big deal. This film was like one of their big focal points of the festival. So when I left it, and I felt so underwhelmed by it. I just felt so bad because I was like, ah, damn, I gotta like go on here after listening to Pedro Almodovar do like a 20-minute intro, and that man knows how to talk. I actually thought it was very funny how he came out and basically talked about the entire movie before we had even watched it, almost forgetting that this was not the Q&A for the previous screening. This was the lead up to the next one, and it's actually funny because a few screenings later, and I'll talk about it when I talk about Hard Truths, but Mike Lee was like, I don't want to be one of those directors who comes up and like talks about his whole movie and what the movie's about before you've even watched the movie. So I'm like, you know, it's very funny that Pedro Almodovar literally did the thing that Mike Lee said he hates, which is basically explaining the entirety of the movie's themes and what goes on in the movie before you've even seen it. But, you know, I don't begrudge Pedro Almodovar for doing it. It's his film. He's allowed to talk about it however he wants. But I just thought it was funny because he built this thing up in 20 minutes just talking about all the themes and the resonating that he had with the plot, and then the way, you know, he found a lot of catharsis in this story and the interesting subject matters that this was bringing up and the actresses and all the performances. Like, he was giving his full-on like expose review for 20 minutes before the film, and I was really hyped up. I was really amped up. I was like, okay, this sounds really fascinating. This sounds really interesting. And then it happened, and you know what? I was a little underwhelmed, and it sucks because, you know, I want to go into every festival movie and just love it. I want to come out of these and be like, this is getting nominated for this Oscar. This is up for this Oscar. This is great. This should be the winner. This is my best of the fest. This is my favorite movie. But some movies just don't speak on that higher level. But it doesn't even, you know, it doesn't amount to a total wash across the board either, because there are things about The Room Next Door that I really appreciate, but overall it just wasn't a film that I totally vibed with and totally clicked with. Now you're probably wondering, what is this movie that you've been going on 3 minutes about? Well, let me tell you. This movie stars Tilda Swinton as a woman who is dying of cancer. She reconnects with her previous, it's unclear if she was like a best friend or just a close friend, but they haven't seen each other in a few years, her and Julianne Moore, her friend, and they basically reconnect. Julianne Moore didn't even know she was terminally ill with cancer, and Tilda Swinton basically gives her this really daunting task of, hey, take a vacation with me into this cabin in the woods. Essentially, it's less of a cabin, more of like this really luxury, beautiful villa house thing. But like, let's go into the woods, buy a house or rent a house and rent a room. And one morning, if you see that my door is closed, it means that I have done the deed. And that deed is basically taking a euthanasia pill to basically end her life, because she's dying of cancer. And she said, you know what? I want to be in control of when I die. And I think just the basic premise of that, it's heavy. There's a lot to deal with in just that mere premise. But I think it's a very fascinating premise. You know, the idea of like, you know, should you allow nature to take its course, or should you have a say in how you go? But if you do have a say in how you go, is that necessarily taking your own life, or is it just, you know, not prolonging the inevitable? And what is the moral kind of battle you have when you have that conversation? And should you even have to have that conversation? Should it be illegal to do so, or should it be normalized to be able to basically speak on your own behalf, on your own body, on your own mental health and health in general, and say when it's time? I mean, we think about it when we talk about our animals, and it's a very sad conversation that inevitably, I would say 75% of animal owners have to have at the end of an animal's life. And it's very, very sad. But when it's humans and, when there's this whole stigma and when suicide is such a prominent topic of conversation in mental health, this isn't mental health. This is more so just like, I'm going to die of cancer. What do I do? Should I just end it early? And it's a very interesting moral dilemma that I think in general, in its concept, alone is very interesting. And I think that was the most interesting part of the movie, was just kind of thinking about this moral dilemma. But then you kind of get this whole kind of beautiful friendship kind of blossom. You start to see the two of them connect and kind of a push and pull back in this decision making. And then when the decision's finally made, it's all about the aftermath. How does she get away with it? How does she cover her tracks, Julianne Moore, and what is her alibi essentially? And I'm not going to tell you whether or not Tilda Swinton does it or not, but just the idea of the implication of being this kind of witness. Like, if she's to do this, what is Julianne Moore responsible for? Again, really good ideas. And I think the problem for me is not necessarily in the concept as much as it is the execution. I just felt like some of these scenes just went on too long. A lot of it was repetitive. It kind of retreaded the same beats over and over again, the same talking points, which I guess when you're in the midst of a crisis like this and a very difficult conversation and a difficult dilemma, yes, the same questions are going to weigh over your mind. You're going to weigh the pros and cons, and you're going to weigh the pros again, and then you're going to weigh the cons again. But I think for a movie, it didn't necessarily work on top of the Pedro Almodovar style. And this is where I will give myself a little bit of a handicap, because I haven't seen many of his movies. The only other movie I've seen of his is Parallel Mothers, which was a few years ago. And this was kind of a later in his career, once he's been already established, Pedro Almodovar effort. And I think this is another one. This is actually his first full-length English language film as well. So I think this was one where I feel like if I had seen the breadth of Pedro Almodovar's work and being able to see exactly what his style is, because he has such a unique style, and that's clear from the get-go. I mean, the use of color, the very distinct close-ups and angles, and the way he's framing everything in the frame, the sensuality, the closeness, the intimacy, the touch, all of that is there. There's very impressive stuff going on, but I think tonally, his films are very different. They do feel very foreign from what you're normally expected to see, especially in a movie like this, which you would expect to play out like a normal heavy drama. But in this thing, you have a lot of melodrama, you have a lot of like very sweeping dramatic sequences and a lot of bigger acting, which is very interesting considering Tilda Swinton is very small in her acting because she's playing a dying woman. But you have a lot of characters around her who are acting a little bit broader, a little bit bigger. And then just the overall tone, there is a dark comedy in it too, which again, for a film about euthanasia and suicide and death, not necessarily where you would expect a lot of comedy. And I'm fine with comedy being a part of a story like this because, again, it is interesting, it is unique. But I think the style of comedy and just the way the melodrama was conveyed, it's still something I'm getting used to, I should say. And I think it's one of those things where if I do go back and I watch all of Pedro Almodovar's work, maybe I'll be able to see more clearly that like this is very much his stamp and his style on the work. But I think having just seen 2 films of his now, I think a lot of the melodrama and a lot of the way they interact and the way they speak, especially because this is, like I said, the first English language film that he's directed entirely in the English language, I think there is that kind of disconnect there still. It felt a little bit too far at an arm's length, too far within or far away from my grasp, I should say, to where I just was left a little bit underwhelmed. I feel like if it had gone even harder in the comedy, I would have liked it a little bit more. If it had backed off of the comedy, I would have liked it a little bit more. But I think because of the amount of comedy they put into it, I think there's a few moments that get borderline chuckleable, where you can chuckle at it. I don't know if that's a word, chuckleable. It is now. Add it to your dictionary. I'm sure people keep tabs of all the words I make up in these reviews. But I do think, there are moments where it teeters on it. But again, it doesn't feel like it's going full-fledged dark comedy, but it also doesn't feel like it's going full-fledged drama either. It kind of exists in this weird middle ground that, again, could be his auteurism. It could be his style, but I just personally haven't seen enough of his stuff to kind of settle into that groove yet, which I think is just kind of the nature of every film goer and every stylist, especially people who have such unique visions. And I think this is where I do give The Room Next Door its kudos. And the fact that it does have at least a unique style, it is not necessarily a style I've been able to fully grasp, but it is a style nonetheless. And I'd rather a movie like this that I don't click with, but I can at least acknowledge they're doing stuff that's very interesting and unique, rather than a movie that feels just very rote, very studio mandated, very basic, flatly lit. I really think this is at least exciting from that perspective, even if I didn't click with it. And I just think the nature of the two of them and their relationship. It's very clear that the two actresses have a lot of chemistry, Tilda Swinton and Julianne Moore. There's moments of such physical intimacy. I was almost wondering if this would get into a romantic point, and I think this movie might have honestly been stronger if that was the case, because I think the actual friendship isn't set up very well to where it's very clear they haven't talked in a little while, but they don't really give a reason as to why. They don't really make it seem like it was a tarnished relationship. It's just they haven't reached out in a while. And I have my friends like that, especially my friends from high school that I don't talk to all the time. And I check up on them maybe once or twice a year, but I don't see them constantly enough to where if something major in their life happened, I guess with social media, I would probably know, but there are a lot of revelations that come up when you catch up with someone after it's been a long time. I get that, but it's also like, because of the direction this film takes and it being so reliant on this two-person bond, it feels like I wish they had I wish they had kind of established the bond to be a little bit closer early on, or maybe given them some sort of really big kind of tarnishing that they can then overcome through their relationship and kind of resolve, because it feels like they're already kind of starting out as friends, but not like the best of friends, but not like enemies or anything. They don't have any beef. They're just like, acquaintances, and I think it would have been stronger if they really committed to making that relationship a bit stronger from the start to then kind of be able to go on this really emotional journey with them. I do think the third act brings probably the most exciting stuff. I think Alessandro Nivola steals the film in a very brief scene at the end. I do think just the aftermath of everything that this film has been building to is very fascinating. There is kind of a weird casting that I'm not going to spoil, obviously, but as someone who comes into the picture a little late. The problem with the third act also is that it felt very rushed. I feel like the most exciting stuff was seeing what would happen after this trip in the woods, and I feel like that was the part that was just kind of breezed through. It was like, let's spend like a good hour and a half in the woods, and then let's spend like 20 minutes out of it. I am not looking at the exact time code, so it might be a little bit off, but it did feel like we were spending a big block of time in the place where things were mostly expected to resume as planned, whereas the stuff that happens after is the stuff that was the most, up in the air. What was going to happen? We really have no idea, and I think that would have been a lot more fun to kind of watch that unfold in more time and just give that more time to unfold and provide more drama and more excitement and more suspense. Again, like, there are a lot of great, interesting little flourishes here and there, particularly from the direction and the performances. Tilda Swinton is great. She's very subdued, but everything she does has so much power, but that's expected at this point. I think Julianne Moore, again, kind of expected at this point what kind of quality performance she would be giving, to where I feel like because these actresses are just like giving great performances, it doesn't feel extraordinary because we expect them to be great performances, but they are great performances. And I think Pedro Almodovar does have some promise. It just, for me, it comes with the writing and some of the character relationships and just the execution of that third act in particular, and the use of comedy versus melodrama. But I am looking forward to kind of going back and watching more of his work, because he's just such a fun guy, especially to listen to speak. He opened with a 20-minute spiel about his movie, and I was just so, in awe of that. I would have liked to maybe come up with some of those revelations on my own, but there was just such a fun nature of getting to hear a filmmaker speak about something he's so passionate about. And it's hard to watch a movie after hearing someone spill all their passion out on stage to then watch something and be like, and I never want to have that reaction for a film. And I am very sorry that I had that reaction for a film, but it is my honest opinion. And I hope that more of these movies, and I've seen all these movies, so I can say right now, a lot of them did kind of raise the bar. So this was one of the lower points, but not the lowest point. There are movies to come that I will talk about that are a little lower on my list, but not my favorite. But I do think if I were to rewatch this in the midst of watching a lot of his other films, once I finally clicked with his style, I think I'll like it a bit more. But as for Oscars, because people are going to ask, especially now that we know they're both campaigning in lead actress, I should say. I do think because they're both campaigning in lead now, they might end up canceling each other out. I do think Tilda Swinton just has a showier role in general, so I think she's a more likely nominee. But at this point, I think this film is kind of landing in the middle ground for a lot of people. Not as negative as I am on it, but some people are a little negative. I don't hear a lot of glowingly positive reviews out there yet for this, to where I don't necessarily know if this is going to be an Academy player. Also, because the subject matter is difficult, it's a hard sell in general, and I think a lot of people are just going to kind of want to avoid it altogether because it is a tricky subject matter. What I will say is that you should check it out, because I do think at least it brings up a really interesting moral dilemma at the center of it, that I think is going to be really insightful for people and exciting and different than what we've seen in a lot of film, because I've never seen a film about a woman contemplating whether she should let cancer take her or whether she should end her own life. Like, I really don't see many movies like that. So I do think for that purpose, I think you should seek it out. But I was a little underwhelmed, and I don't necessarily know if this is going to be a big Oscar player, maybe a screenplay nod, but it is in the English language, so it's not going to be able to compete for international, whereas his films normally would be able to. So that's my spiel. Those are my thoughts on The Room Next Door. I promise I tried to keep it as positive as I could, despite not being a fan of the film. But if you were a fan, if you've seen this film and you want to share your love for it, please do in the comments below, because I think it's important to hear all voices on every matter. So if you are a fan of this film, please let me know down below, because I want to hear why you love it, and maybe it'll help me understand why people are tapping into it in a more positive light than I am. And if you didn't love it like me, share why, but always remember to be respectful in the comments for the people who do love it. And if you're excited to see it, let me know in the comments. Just let me know in the comments. Tell me about your day. Even if you watch this and you have no thoughts on this movie, tell me what you ate for breakfast, because I want you to tell me everything. I'm all ears. I need a friend. But thank you guys so much for listening to this review. Stay tuned for more New York Film Festival 62 coverage throughout the week. I'm hopefully going to be done with this whole journey by the end of this week, so I can give you my definitive ranking of all my New York Film Festival 62 coverage, and of course then give you updated Oscar predictions, because my mind's been changed in a lot of areas. So I'm very excited for that. But thank you for watching this. Like, please comment, please subscribe. Please do all you can to support this channel, because I don't do it alone. There's so many great listeners and subscribers and people who help me out behind the scenes that I'm very grateful for, that keep this channel going and keep me doing what I'm doing. So thank you so much. Pardon my scratchiness. I'm getting over a cold. Not really. I'm still in the midst of it. But thank you so much, and stay tuned for more. Bye.